Okay, so hello everybody, and good evening or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. If it's daytime, I hope it's a sunny one for you. We haven't been getting much sun here for the past few days, but anyway, I hope you're luckier than us. And it's lovely to have you here this evening, and happy World Environment Day to all of you. We decided to mark this special day by poetry, as usual. And our two special guests this evening are Juliet JLM Morton and Ella Duffy. So I am going to briefly present Ella and Juliet, and then we will proceed with the readings. So Ella Duffy is the author of two pamphlets of poetry, New Hunger by Smith Doorstop and Rootstock by Hazel Press. Her work has appeared in the Poetry Review, the London magazine, the Rialto, Poetry Ireland Review and Ambit, among others. She is the editor of Seeds and Roots by Hazel Press, an anthology of botanical poetry. Juliet, JLM Morton, her work explores contemporary rural experience and practices of care, repair, and solidarity across human and other than human worlds. Her work is published in the Poetry Review, the Rialto, Magma, Berlin Lit, Bad Lilies, Anthropocene, Poetry Birmingham, Dust, Sunday Telegraph, and elsewhere, and has been anthologized in Living with Water, 21 poems about wonky animals, and Places of Poetry. She is the winner of the Laurie Lee Jeffrey Dermer Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust Poetry and International Dylan Thomas Day Prizes. Laline Powell called her the literary daughter of Alan Garner, female psychogeography, a rallying call to protect not only the land, but our right to roam. While her first full collection of poems, Red-Handed by Broken Sleep 2024, has been described as a remarkably original and impressive debut collection of poetry, exploring the histories of cloth and dye, the natural world, and family. Morton skillfully combines personal recollections with political activism and care, her voice raw and her imagination fierce. These poems are exquisitely crafted. Find her online at www.jlmmorton.com. And this is a huge honor for Indelible to have you both here tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome you, Ella and Juliet, to take it away. And I believe we're starting with Ella. So Ella?
Thank you so much, Ula. Thank you. Hi everyone. It's really fantastic to be here this evening, reading alongside Juliet. So hello. So I'm going to be reading some new work this evening, most of which comes from the poetry collection that I'm currently working on, which looks at various between spaces and travels above and below ground. And later on, I'll be reading from a new piece of work, a very new piece of work. So all new this evening. But first, I would like to begin my reading with reading a poem by Palestinian poet Rawan Hussein. This is Dawn. Dawn broke on our heads. Endings were cut down to size. Our little one's feet rapidly turned toward the sky. Time set itself aside and places shut their eyes, like a child with words that grey behind her lids. Ceilings tumbled, waterfalls of stone, and under the rubble, the last perceived image hangs. A final painting sculpted on our faces. Alone we grow old tonight, weave hours and wear them, gobble the terror that runs down our kids' mouths. Who will devour our rusted lips? Light takes a walk. Light takes a walk, and winter has never been more itself. Light, it sips the eye of a blackbird twice, then tips a leaf with silver. This is only how we remember it, the idea of light claimed by a web, the old light of a stone. There is more than one winter in the wood where light walks. There is the winter at risk of spring. Carry water from a stream, carry light and wash in it. Light, though part of its mind is hard, will store itself in earth as bulb to flower into something more than light. So I'm going to stay in the forest and read this next poem, which is called Heresium. And if you haven't seen Heresium, either in person or an image of it, it's the most amazing edible mushroom, which grows in these sort of long spines. They look like dripping candle wax, and it grows on dead or dying wood. And there's something quite ghostly about this mushroom. So I took that as my starting point and wrote this kind of afterlife poem, I suppose, which floats somewhere between the human and the more than human. Heresium. If when we die, the soul attaches itself to something half alive, mine will settle for forest rot, drip its thousand spines to a pale spill. Woodland does not pause at loss. It lives through its buried. Another hounded fox, the wrong red. Somewhere, a horse chestnut's falling pulse, and in the damp, stars yawn into autumn. Everything and nothing in this wood. When I become impossibly light, appear as wax, let foragers steal my ghost meat home, prepare a meal of it, slow as winter. So these next three poems, I suppose, look at what exists above and below the surface of things. So the first poem, called Surfacing, it was commissioned for the artist Francesca Mollet, who had a solo art exhibition in Amsterdam last year. And this was a series of her abstract paintings, many of which took as their starting point the glossy green paint on the doors of Amsterdam townhouses. If you've been to Amsterdam, you might be familiar with that amazing deep green. And this was a colour that was intended to reflect the green of the canal. So I also took that shade of green as my starting point for this poem, but then went on to explore what kind of exists beyond green. So this is Surfacing. Agreement in colour. A green that moves from water to wood by the heads of mallards, the love-locked railings of bridges. A door, seemingly latched in its greenness, ripples the moment a body stops in its frame. A certain kind of mirror, this green. The capsized reflection of a heron stares up from the canal, and as the body stoops for a dropped glove, the ripple curves, it dips and resurfaces like a cormorant angling for deep, settled fish. More than shells. More than shells, these are the ears of our drowned who have turned on their sides. Rather than write your name in the sand with my toes, I'll leave it with them to grow beyond itself, queer the distance of this beach. So a girl, not yet walking this shore, might hold in her hand the before that came and went, then add to it. As a fling of sandpipers teetering at the sea's lip pick buried grub from the wet, as if discovering their own truths from the earth. And I'm going to end this first reading with a poem called Rumour. Rumour. When a worm murmured its word from under the soil, Rumour took her place, ear to the ground. The dead arrived as frost. What they had to say, unheard by the living, but Rumour listened, and with two new tongues spread what she knew of a town where voices were many, where someone's daughter, out late, hand in hand with a girl, was laughing. The stones heard everything, muttered along their walls, and a whisper held in rock was quick to tell the sky. The town sent itself to bed as Rumour's noise reached the sea, always busy repeating what it knows. Then only salt, lifting Rumour again, till the birds fed it all back to the earth, where a worm told another, told the ruins of a woman who began to laugh. Thank you.
Thanks, Ella. That was beautiful. And thanks, Rula, as well, for the invitation to come along tonight and read. I saw Ella do a keynote at the conference in Kew last July, and it was just so thrilling, really, to meet with her and with other people who are working in this space around kind of the human, the more than human, and kind of eco-poetry. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and gorgeous to hear Ella's work as well. I'm going to begin. I'm going to read from my collection primarily tonight, which has just come out, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. But before I do that, I'm going to read a poem by Musab Abu Tulha. It's called A Rose Shoulders Up. Don't ever be surprised to see a rose shoulder up among the ruins of a house. This is how we survived. So I'm going to read from Red Handed. It's a new collection. It just came out last Thursday. And it's the collection that's split into three parts. I'm going to read from the different parts of the collection as the evening goes on. But it starts by exploring the links between cloth and colonialism, essentially. And I wanted to think about this collection and go into this collection through the lens of the environment that we're exploring for World Environment Day tonight. And I'm really interested in stories that, or voices that perhaps haven't been heard before, and how rural stories of the land really can speak to and illuminate kind of really grand global narratives, such as colonialism. So the first part of my collection does this by exploring the textile heritage of the West Country of England and its connections to the colonies and to plantation slave labour in particular. And our environments today have been so deeply informed by these histories. The red woolen broadcloth that English soldiers are so famous for wearing as redcoats, and which King Charles wears in his latest portrait that was unveiled a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you've seen it, by Jonathan Yeo. So that originates from the Stroud Valleys, which is where I live, and it's called Stroud Scarlet. And it's made from the wool of Cotswold sheep and the dye from the cochineal beetles, which were harvested by enslaved and indentured people, usually in Mexico, Central America, and then shipped to Europe, where it was very highly valued by colonial powers like Spain and Britain. So I'm going to begin by reading a couple of red poems, which I'll let them speak for themselves. And the first one is How a Siksika Headdress Ends Up in an English Museum. The hands I don't know. The hands this trail of cloth passed through like a red bride. From shepherd to shearer, to spinner, to weaver, to dyer, to fuller, to shearsman, to boatman adventurer who bartered the cloth on the Hudson Bay, to fur trader, to siksika, who used a needle to sew the length of red cloth to the headband. Did it slip and prick your finger as you threaded through the weave? Did you drop some blood on the red? How can I know the name of your first love? Was your favourite bird a cardinal or a snow goose, a hawk or a blue jay? These things are not just objects. The smell of gunfire carries over grassland. How far was fear triggered by that first repeating rifle? Let me begin with the cost of the fertilizer made from your own buffalo's bones. Let me begin with something I don't know. Life cycle of the cochineal beetle, circa 1788. An egg breaks on the pad of a prickly pear somewhere in Oaxaca, where the scale insect's livid bodies mass and crackle in the sun. Emerging, a crawler nymph clusters with the softness of her siblings to feed in the downy blanket, explorers edging to the brink of the known world. Nymph throws out a long wisp of wax, a thread to catch a ride on the wind, lifting and landing on the terra incognita of a new cactus pad. Her claim is staked with a stab of her beak. Cochineal sups the juices, sees off predators, lacewings, ladybirds, ants, with the bright surprise of her body. Fat, fierce and full of poison, she has detached her wings, has no need of legs. Holding her colour, quietly in trust, she waits for the male to eat his fill, to mate and die. Scraped away at 90 days, her body is laid out and dried, pulverized, destined for dominion. So another colour that I explore in the collection is blue. So broadcloth was often dyed. The key colours were red, blue, yellow, and green. But the most popular colours were the red and the blue. So the broadcloth made from the Cotswold wool was dyed with indigo, and that was used for naval uniforms. And again, that was another really valuable raw material that was produced in the colonies and shipped to Europe. And it was very, very desirable, this beautiful deep blue. And indigo itself was incredibly valuable. It was called blue gold. So I quite often read this sort of the lyrical, beautiful poems when I do a reading, but I thought I'd push myself a little bit and go towards some of the more kind of grotesque or challenging poems tonight. So I'm going to read a poem which is a kind of found poem or kind of collage poem from the letters of a woman, a girl actually, she was only 16, called Eliza Lucas Pinckney. She was the most successful indigo farmer. I mean, she wasn't. The enslaved people, which she owned, were the most successful indigo farmers in the Southern American states of South Carolina. And she was responsible for triggering an indigo trade boom in the 18th century at just the age of 16. Letters and memoranda from a 16-year-old white girl. I flatter myself, my lot has fallen here. Much friendship, civility, polite, agreeable, very much in the English taste. The country is in general fertile and abounds, employed in business, the business of 3 plantations, much writing, more business, much business. Greater hopes from the indigo in preference, the loss of a man, the pleasure of a line from you, so great a blessing, a barrel of butter. The young men who dyed the broadcloth blue around here, a couple of miles away from where I live, were called the Blue Boys. And there was a pub for probably about 300 years up on the top of the common called the Blue Boys Inn. It's no longer there, but it was a coaching inn. And that pub sign still hangs in the local museum. It's quite haunting. This is a poem about those blue boys. So I just kind of imagine walking the streets at night, haunting the local villages with their blue stained hands. The squeaking hinge on the pub sign has been trying to say, look how they haunt this hinge of high land. Blue boys linger between common ground and the new estate. Look to the night sky, an indigo bonanza emptied into their vat. But first, the ocean, its currency of brass manillas and lines of chained men. Somewhere a white girl is plunged in her vegetable world, commanding the plants to set root. Black girls are raised for blue dye, pounding the leaves to break, ferment, strain and sun-dry the stench. Each bale is bloodied and bound, carried on the sea's rough hands to the blue boys who pass on their art with colour that only comes true on the air. I'm just going to finish this section with a sheep poem. It wouldn't be a collection about textiles if there wasn't a sheep poem in there somewhere. But also I wanted to read this poem tonight because the sheep have so have shaped the landscape of the Cotswolds in many ways. They've kind of, it's because of them that we have a field system. It's because of them that it's less wooded around the Cotswold Hills than it used to be. It's because of the sheep that the Cotswolds is such a wealthy area. It's a tourist destination in the UK nowadays, and it's dotted with these incredibly lavish wall churches and beautiful country houses built from the honey-coloured Cotswold stone. So there's a painting in our local museum of this huge ram and a young lad standing next to the ram looking incredibly proud of this prize-winning beast. And I thought I would like to write a poem in the voice of the ram, and it's called Love Song for You, as in you, female sheep. Love song for you. No beast grazes a hill as I do, ruminating on forbs and clover, the panopticon of my rectangular pupils set in gold. Count me, my lover, tup your coins. For you I would kneel without lameness, which is to say, I'll remember if you go. I'm on the run with all the lustre of my fleece. I leap the gate, make of the dell a fire in my wake. The turn of a branch has nothing on your improbable limbs, the pride in the angles of your skull. Follow me as I follow you to each blade of grass. We will eat in the noiseless altitude. We will feast on the summit.
Thank you so much, Julia. That's just, yeah, such powerful work. And yeah, to kind of go back to what you were saying at the beginning, so lovely to sort of be reunited at another event. It's always so exciting being in the room, even if it's virtual, with people doing similar things and sharing similar spaces. So yeah, really wonderful being here. I'm going to do my second reading, and I'm reading very, very new work now. I earlier this year, Hazel Press very kindly commissioned me to write a new piece of work on Greencombe Gardens in Porlock, Exmoor. And it's just Greencombe Gardens. It was just the most amazing place. I'd never been before, and went at the end of March this year for 5 days. And it's just the most incredible woodland garden overlooking the Bristol Channel. It's 3.5 acres, contains 4 national plant collections. Home produces all of its own compost and leaf mould. It's just the most magical place. And I think Sarah from Hazel and Rob from Greencombe are here tonight somewhere in the Zoom room. So hello. So yeah, I was just so excited to be able to write about this place. And visiting there, walking around, exploring the gardens for 5 days was just more than I could have imagined, really. And it led me to this poem that I've written that is, I believe, going to be published sometime this summer. I handed it in, I think, about a week ago. So it's very, very fresh, and the first time that I've ever read it out loud. So we'll see how it goes. But the poem itself follows the paths of the garden. I do have a map here that I can hold up and see if you can see it. Here's part of the map. Don't know if you'll be able to see that. And there's more on the back that I've managed to spill a bit of coffee on. But the poem follows the paths of the garden. The paths have these amazing names like Hare Path and Snail Crawl and Shortcut, Mouse Path. So the poem sort of walks through the garden, going down little detours, going back on itself. So it's a walking poem. But for tonight, on the page itself, you would see the names of the paths. But I thought for this evening, I would leave out the names of the paths and just read the poem as if it was a long wandering poem. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. So I'll be reading an extract from this poem, which is called Greencombe, a poem of paths. Shed, fruit cage, huddle of pots, a kitchen garden, herb measured, veg tied. Through an arch in the wall, the path changes from brick to soil to stone. Stone steps down to grass. You could walk straight, but turn off down the ravine, stop at a small raised pond. A backswimmer with hair-slick legs completes its upended lap. A larger pond, edged with old quarry stone, reflects new light. To your right, the first guardian oak. Dream of this tree for a long life. You stand at the lookout. Ahead, the salt marsh. Years back, when the sea rose and breached the shingle ridge, it petrified the trees. From where you stand, the forest is a distant stillness. Shallow steps up to the holly. Coppiced, it grew multiple trunks, a long bird life. The path cuts through it, circles back on itself. This is the first time you've walked through the centre of a tree. Ahead of you, 4 centuries of ghosts walking the same circular route. You've walked through gardens where a bench is an invitation to face out towards a further view. Behind you, the garden engaged in a game of grandmother's footsteps, slow creep of plant life, all the insects lifting their feet. Here, the benches face inwards. To rest is to turn towards the garden. Watch and wonder walk this downward path, past the four-faced bed, eye of spore, eye of wing, eye of bark, eye of seed. Left foot, right foot, jaywalk, jayhop, birdwing, birdfoot. 3 oak bed with acorns for jays to store under stones, underground. One bird can bury up to 3,000 acorns a month. After the last ice age, the oak spread north, a blue-dipped feather on the path. Birdwing, birdfoot, jaywalk, jayhop, left foot, right foot. Detour down a path designed to ease the flow of garden work. To your right, the second guardian. To your left, the third. For 2 months of the year, the sun refuses to sit up from behind its hill. Only catkins candle the hours. What jobs need doing? 30 tons of leaf mould and compost made and used each year. Bacteria ridden, worm gripped. The earth's book is shelved in this garden. A farmer herding sheep in the lower field calls with long vowels. If you were listening at night, the tawny owl would shepherd the dark, a lower pitch to push through the dense standing of trees. You pass the next 3 guardian oaks, their long lines and invisible lines which work to pull your head up and back as if you were a marionette. When the strings tangle, one foot trips over the other and the hinge in your ankle creaks. The garden has thrown itself up into the air and is growing vertically. Feet still, but eyes quick, you take in over 100 trees. 4 chestnuts open 4 doors. A hare bolts from the underworld. On the other side of the door, the garden narrows and cools. When the wood's edge was planted, it rushed to fill each greenless gap. Flowers like snow, settling, settling. No longer a path, but a space only a mouse could pass through. Moss drum, lichen snare. In this garden, on this path, you are a fawn, newly listening. Beetles click, click in the leaf fall, a twig splits underfoot. Or like a cub, newly scenting. Petrichor, the perfume the earth puts on before meeting the rain. The air above the sea rotates. It rains and spins the garden on its axis. You shelter beneath a rhododendron, the largest you've ever seen, leaves the size of roof tiles. You are standing in a room generous with light. Your presence here, only addition. Thank you.
Beautiful, thanks, Ella. I think the piece that I'm going to read now actually really responds to that in an unexpected way, which is lovely. I think, you know, our poems are definitely in conversation with one another. But I'm going to move on to the middle section of Red-Handed. And after spending probably 2 or 3 years writing about like essentially decolonizing the textile heritage of the West Country, I did feel quite, I felt quite alienated from my home landscape, which was a very strange experience. And I wanted to renew my bond, really. I'd also lived away for a few decades, working overseas, living overseas, and then kind of living in, you know, the big cities like London and Manchester and Brighton and so on. And I came back to my home place and wanted to restore that sort of sense of belonging. And the first thing that I did to do that, I guess, is I wrote a long poem which is called Sentient, which makes up the middle section of the book. and it's set between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, kind of, I guess, almost in what people often think of as the dead zone of winter. It just happened to be during lockdown, so it did feel like this sort of strangely dead, diseased, incredibly difficult period of time. You know, the plague month, the plague years. And I went on these kind of daily forays into the landscape to see what I could find that was alive. And I would bring these things back in little wax envelopes and keep them. And they eventually kind of contributed towards the development of this poem, which is essentially an invocation, really, an entreaty to the world, to the landscape to persist, to survive. There's an epigraph that opens the poem from Alice Oswald, which I actually found after I'd written the poem, but I felt like it spoke to the way that I was trying to write the poem, trying to write in a different way, I guess. And she talks about this idea of blackbird grammar. So quick statements, she says, pursued to the point of amazement, then silence. Sentient. Hedge, witch, on the scarp rim, rock worn, frost needled, play the line between wild and world, be the buzzard, read the palm of sky, find grass has ceased to grow. Cloud's thin garland hangs at the grey smudge of the near horizon. Solstice stand still, sun stands still. See the mountains again, insistent sandstone cone of sugarloaf. All this survival, grasping last brambles like the traveller's joy, smothering life. See what hope this tongue and bone of a season. Test a body on a steep incline. Throat catch, wind strip the newborn year. Fine as hogweed filaments, trembling firmament. Put away satin beauty moth in the yews hold. Percuss the nettle sting. Name perihelion. Earth moves faster. Stop water, a solid state. Glaze blackened dog rose hips the old dock patch. See the ash trees fall, one by one by one. Their absence a sky's grief, the gut stun of their cut trunks. This quaking earth does not predict. Rain after rain, singing after blackbird singing, first blackbird singing after rain. Taste the wild garlic, bear's onion, stinking, past the cold front, past the rough medicine of borage, see off our fevers, goosegrass, the season's borderlands, not yet sticky enough to cleave. Touch the toad, pass through the thin place, ancestral breeding pond. Blackthorn, last in fruit, first in bloom. Pollen cap the anthers, beckon bees, beetles, sleep, sleep on, sleep on. 3 white willows at the spring, branches so ready to ignite the blue flame of sky. Do not say the early colour of spring is not green, it is arterial red. How catkins talk in trembling ochre tongues. And I should say, that was just an extract from the poem, but I should say that it was also really beautifully illustrated by a local artist and designer. She's incredibly talented, called Susie Hetherington. So some of those illustrations appear in the book as well. So just moving on to the third and final part of the collection, another way that I decided to sort of reignite my love for the landscape was by swimming and walking and trespassing along my home river. which is the River Churn, and that's 23 miles from its source at Seven Springs, which is near Cheltenham, to its confluence with the River Thames at Cricklade. It is in fact the first tributary of the River Thames, which is obviously a very storied river in the UK and England in particular. And there are various fights ongoing between members of Parliament as to whether or not it is in fact the Thames, because that would make it the longest river in England, and it would overtake the Severn. So that experience of walking that river and trespassing along it and swimming in it when I could led me kind of back to myself, really, and a radical right to roam, so to reclaim that connection to the environment, which was a connection that I'd first claimed without realizing it really as a child, and later as a raver in the 90s, late 80s, 90s. And it also led me into the deeper time of the landscape. So I kind of reached back really to the first Iron Age settlers, the Dubonnie, who worshipped mother goddesses along the riverbanks. And that led me ultimately to a residency at Corinium Museum in Cirencester. So that interest, or the worshipping of mother goddesses and the way that they are worshipped in triplicate, these kind of, you see these votive reliefs with three mother goddesses, was very specific to the Cotswolds. The only other place you really find it in that same work configuration is up in Northumberland on Hadrian's Wall. And there's lots of speculation as to why that might be, whether Roman soldiers carried those statues with them. It came from the Dubonnie, but it was hybridized by the Romans, of course. So there are there's various statuary around, which is Celtic and or Romano-Celt. So I've got a whole suite of poems around mother goddesses in the final section of my collection, and they kind of become a lens, I guess, through which I explore family, motherhood, my own motherhood, and finding belonging again. So I'm just going to read a couple of poems from that section. One thing that they did at the museum was they allowed me to go into a room, and they locked me in this room with a fragment of a 2,000-year-old statue and just sort of left me with it. And I sort of wondered what on earth I was going to do with this fragment of the statue, but it actually ended up being a sort of a uniquely powerful experience. And so this poem started with that experience. Secrets of Matter and Spirit. I hold my mother within me, the way stone is made up of minerals, the ossified body of a mollusk, the memory of heat in quartz. If I frame the statue's face with my camera, see her robust arms draw in, it is my child asking me to guard the warm spot as she runs to another room and returns, jumping back in just to feel the weightlessness. My grandmother is a hare, running at speed, eyes set high with an orbital range. I am seen, and the hare's gaze rests upon me. I rest, the way the weather has worn soft the statue's ministrations. This is how I hold the fragment, as if the weight is something I could travel through, and the places where touch has lightened the patina are pathways to the sacred. Climb inside my mother's urn and see how it is filled with fireflies. Hounds and children curl around my legs. What sound is there for this ritual? Perhaps a growl, long and steady, as my camera frames the face of the mother. Sometimes the rain extinguishes, but the body is a record, mongrel strata layered with different versions of childhood, barking and simpering in their Jurassic furs, yet loyal as stone, which is how I would like to be held. Furious Magic I'm about to read now. So this is set at the Thermal Springs in Bath, England. And I wanted to read it because it was first published in Magma, Underworld, which was guest edited by Ella and Kate Simpson and Leo Boyce. And that recently came out. It's a great issue, really groundbreaking in lots of ways. Yeah, so just for that reason, I thought I'd read it. Furious Magic. Below street level in the thermi, sulphur seeps into the shops and houses above, evaporates like a dream of being warm and fed, or the hot spring of 8,000-year-old rain forced through a fault. Not the oracle, but the premonition itself. Sulis Minerva, sun and wisdom, solar power, accept my curses. Your gut gazers read the portents of the earth's bowels sloshing with wine. Keepers of memory, diviners of the future, I beg them to tell against expectation. People here still throw their coins in the frigidarium. I throw mine and wish with all the currency of the world for defacement by the minerals and the metal to act without flinch or falter. Give me the weather I need. All that drizzle between drought and flood is the name I keep for your consolations. Life flickers, translucent as the thin-leaved white beam, or the eye socket of a pale corvid, sacred conduit between living and dead. All of us, animals among animals, we are a fixed red thread of common. Each rotation, every root could be a revelation, a tree growing from this dark, powdered cone of green. Just going to finish this section with the last poem in the book, which is, you know, gesturing more towards a preoccupation, as was Furious Magic, actually, with climate change, which is, and the kind of climate emergency, which is where my work is very much focused now. This is called I Hold This Fragile Sphere. I hold this fragile sphere of earth and sit up on the long barrow to see myself, a minuscule speck on the sphere at the end of the day, at the end of the world, and tell myself there could be more time. And the waters of the Severn promise me they've always been to sea, and the Neolithic souls promise they've forever crossed between worlds. And that evening, the larks crowd in with the brome grass and mollusks, the bee orchids and oolite, undoing all the binaries and bringing the outside, inside, out. And for a few hours, I feel completely held by the intimacy of our strangeness, multiplying in tender bonds on this tiny sphere of earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. Absolutely, yeah, gorgeous work. Thank you. I'm going to end for my third reading. I'm going to return to the work from the collection I'm working on, but I might stay in the garden. So I think I'll read yeah, maybe around 4 poems from the collection, beginning with a garden poem. I moved to Bristol a couple of years ago. It was the first time I had sort of experience with a garden, which has been interesting. It seems to just be a lot of spiders and a lot of slugs. So this poem came out of tackling the garden with spades and such. Dusk. Times I've been out with a spade, the ground open like a jaw. A circle of bacterial gods have been discussing their appetites. Bad-mouthed gods, drinking root wine. You can hear their speech slurring with the stuff, and when they sing, their words are slow-moving as sap. Times we've been out, doubled over like pigs, working the soil for stones, everything eating and being eaten. Microbe shiver, 50 worms per square foot, a mole wringing its hands. This is when we are at our most, out with the evening moths, enormous like the early drafts of birds. The rake catching its breath against the bricks. So a different garden. This poem is called Death's Longing for the Colour Green, where I can't quite remember where it came from, but I just kind of was intrigued about what it would be like to live next door to Death and what it would be like to live next door to her garden. So it came out of that and Death's imaginary garden, and what she would want from her garden. Turns out she wants more green in her garden. So this Death's longing for the colour green. I have seen her steal a pot of herbs. I've seen her hook a tree's reflection from a pond. All Death's garden grows is fieldstone, a teasing of lichen. Briefly, the smell of something alive. I've seen her hang 6 woodpeckers from a cypress branch, failing green lanterns. I've seen her pick the unripe berries from the lane. What she wants is a dress hemmed with catchweed, is to crawl the hedges for cuckoo spit and with her thumb steal a frog hopper from the foam. I am afraid of her bottle flies, her aphids doing as death does, sapping the sweet trees, the sound of apples all the time vanishing. And the third garden. This next poem was written for Broken Sleep's anthology, spelt Anne, poems representing Anne Shakespeare. And I discovered that the Hathaway family used the alias Gardner in order to distinguish themselves from other Hathaways. Apparently it was quite a common surname. And I knew that I wanted to write about the Hathaways' farmyard where they kept livestock and vegetables and herbs. So Gardner was the kind of perfect title, really. But on the page, it's spelled Gardner, Gardner. And it's 14 lines, which I thought you have to if you're writing about Shakespeare in any way, sort of slant sonnet. So this is Gardner. Hear my soil speak, its out of time tongues and sage talk, its worm passing, its form and unform. Tend my sorrel, growing where the dead reassemble. Beyond the wall, sheep feed on the common waste. Skirret ends, peelings, all the trimmings, yet the magpies stay only for ticks and woolflies. Tomorrow I'll clear the cot with heavy tools, stir the animal stink with the earth to save for the second plough. Out here, I can teach you things complicated and anonymous, like the weather tricking itself into winter, like the leaves only good for poison, like this needled herb, its flowers a tempting blue. So I think I might end with this final poem. Moves away from the garden, but stays with the earth and with digging. It's a poem written in 2 parts, called Repeating, and I actually wrote it. I've never worked like this before, but wrote it using the cut-up method, where you cut up an original piece of text and rearrange it to make a new text, and playing with repetition through it. And this poem kind of emerged, and again playing with the idea of mythology and folklore, what exists above and what exists below. But thank you so much for being such a lovely audience. It's been a real joy. Repeating. 1. I knew 3 sisters, 3 important sisters, working a land set back from the cold. Cattle tempting flies with their muck, the earth always in need of lifting. I knew 3 sisters working the limit of soil, the low places where shadows of starlings lift and repeat. Tempting, I think, to work with the soil, the muck, the flies, to know what it is to lift and be lifted, needing only the earth and the starlings and the earth. 2. I'll speak as only the land can. Repeat what I know of 3 who knew what it was to work past the earth. There is muck lower than they claim to have lifted, below the flies repeating themselves across the soiled backs of cattle. I saw no starlings, only shadows of hands. And what did they lift from me? And did I live longer for it? Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Ella. Beautiful work. I'm going to move us into the woods now, so not dissimilar in a way to Ella's garden. I've got to kind of, I would say, quite a low-key residency at the moment in a semi-urban woodland. So this is the work I've kind of moved on to after finishing the collection, and this woodland is sandwiched between a kind of social housing estate and what used to be called an area of outstanding natural beauty. I think they're now called national landscapes, and it's Laurie Lee country, and it's very epic and beautiful. And then the housing estate is, this everybody casually dumps their rubbish everywhere, and there are various sort of broken down cars, and there's quite a lot of tension between the 3 spaces. And I'm really interested in that, and kind of really interested in trying to lean into those human nature entanglements. It's not that something I necessarily think I've achieved in the poems yet, but I'm still reaching towards that, trying to get to those kind of connections. So I'm going to read a few poems. Really, these are the unpublished poems, so a couple of them are soon to be published.
So is there anybody in the audience who would like to go ahead and take the mic and ask a question? All right, then we will move to the chat box and we will start from the beginning.
I was just going to jump in with a question.
Chloe, yes, please.
I'm also responsible for many of the comments in the chat. You both inspired such excitement in me. I was kind of picked up on, Juliet, you were mentioning, your radical right to roam, first claimed as a child, swimming and being in the wild. And then this sort of 90s period of your life, I think you said raver. I was thinking, like the free party scene. Many free parties and festivals are on those sites of Bronze and Iron Age settlements that you also mentioned. And I just wondered if you would maybe speak a bit more about your sense of your journey between this kind of pastoral ecstasy, the ecstasy, and now the poetic ecstasy, and especially how that also relates to the mother goddess.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's It's interesting, and you often don't see those connections until sort of after you've been working on the poems or working around a subject for a really long period of time. And I think that the kind of, essentially the radical political impulse to reclaim your connection to the land through the right to roam, reclaiming your right to roam, which was something that was embedded in me. As I say, as a raver, I don't know if you went to or you're part of that movement, but I was at Castle Morton back in 1991, whenever it was, 92, which was the rave, really. It was, for those who don't know, it was a rave on common land up in Worcestershire, just down from the Malvern Hills. You kind of came over the hill down to Castle Morton and saw the kind of, it was so exciting as a young person. You just saw these vehicles and their twinkling lights laid out across the common. But it became one of the largest free parties that had yet happened, and it became the trigger for the criminal justice bill, which limited people's right to listen to repetitive beats outside. And then subsequently limited people's rights to gather in large numbers to do that, and that became the Criminal Justice Act. And I think, how is that? And that's sort of something I guess I certainly carried with me. And I when I walk the land locally, it doesn't feel like trespassing to me. It feels like I'm walking in my home, and the land feels like family. Sadly, I've lost a lot of family in the last few years. My mum remains, and my brother remains, but a lot of the rest of my family are no longer here. And I kind of realized as I was doing this walk along the river that it was actually about processing grief. It was about sort of reclaiming my kind of connection with the land, but it was also very much about finding belonging and family in the landscape. And that was deeply connected as well to me becoming a mother. So these things were kind of concurrently going along. I just want to say a bit about I think you called it the sort of ecstatic pastoral or something like that, and the kind of ecstasy, etc. But I think for me, Ella and I were discussing this earlier, actually. For me, it's really important to be enchanted by the land, to cultivate awe and wonder as a way of strengthening our bonds with the more than human, in a way that will hopefully enable us to nurture a new relationship of care and kinship. So for me, they're very, very deeply connected, and they're all sort of part and parcel of the same thing. I think it's not a utilitarian relationship. You can't kind of, enchant people with your poetry in the hope that, if you insert your poetry in the head of a reader, and it will kind of come out the other side as a kind of, a refreshed, a kind of, eco warrior type, response. It's not that straightforward, but I think there's something in there which is about activism, which links for me back to that kind of radical right to roam. And it's about sort of encouraging people to think differently about their relationship with the non-human, with the more than human. And I'm going to stop there because I don't just want to be the only person talking. Ella, I don't know if you've got anything you'd want to add.
I'm just, thank you for that extraordinary answer. I've taken so many notes on that. I'm just going to throw one seed into the ether because I think there are many influential and poetic literary people in the room. The poet Joelle Taylor talks quite a lot about her time in Greenham Common as being very formative in her journey as a poet and negotiating class and gender and stuff. So I just want to signify, I really want a JLM Morton, Joelle Taylor conversation about these kind of countercultural terrestrial sites and femininity and poetry. Maybe Rula can make that happen.
Oh, I'd love that. Can I just add as a little footnote that one of the poems in the collection is about, I did a residency with the Monica Scher Curatorial Collective, and that took me to Stockholm to see the Monica Scher retrospective, which then moved to Oxford in England. And that at the centre of the one in Stockholm, I think less so at the exhibition in Oxford, was all about Greenham and Monica Scher's really instrumental role in that whole movement. And so I've written a little bit about that in Red Handed. So just a footnote to that, which is obviously then linked to divine feminine and queer ecologies as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chloe. You always give the best comments and questions. And thank you, Juliet, for the wonderful answer. We also have we have many actually. But next up, I see on my screen is from Arden. Hello, Arden. Arden says, Ella and Juliet, thank you both so much for a wonderful evening of poetry. So many beautiful images, lines, and ideas, which I know will stay with me for a while. And Bernard says, Rate catching its breath. I love this poem. I believe this is Ella's poem. And we also have Joan saying, love these garden poems. A question from Ella was, are some of these poems published in Ella's previous collections?
Ah, no. Actually, am I lying? Hericium does feature in Rootstalk as part, yeah, that as part of that series. But all of these, all the ones I read are published somewhere in various journals, but not in a collection yet. But fingers crossed at some point in the future they'll be in a nice little garden home together. But at the moment, yeah, only Hericium, yeah, which is in Rootstalk.
I love that metaphor. The poetry collection as a garden home.
Mm,
Beautiful.
like a little greenhouse or something.
Yes. Yeah. We also have a comment from Sheila. Sheila says, Ella, Juliet, thank you for helping to reconnect with history, fecundity, life, death, and rebirth of the landscape. Beautiful readings. Indeed. Sarah says, thank you, Ella and Juliet. Eloise also says, the best kind of eco poetry. I will be reading more of your poetry, Ella and Juliet. Thank you so much. Arden also, wow, what powerful, incredible poetry. And thank you especially for sharing your unpublished works. This has truly been a joy. Yes, it is a wonderful treat indeed. And Bernard, wonderful. Thank you both, Ella and Juliet. Your work is extraordinary, very different, but great to hear. And Sarah, we hope that Ella's Green Comb Garden Poems will be published in time for Prima Donna Festival at the end of July. The Hazel Press Caravan will be there, and so will Ella. Come and see us. Well, thank you, Sarah, for letting us know. And any more questions or
Can I just
comments?
ask, where is the Prima Donna
Julia.
Festival? Can I just ask where the Prima Donna Festival is?
I should know this, shouldn't I? Is it in Sussex?
Sarah knows.
Suffolk.
Suffolk.
Ooh, Suffolk.
Okay.
Yes.
The other S.
Other S. There you
Yes.
go.
At the end there, yes, the details are coming through. At the end of July, right at the end. Yeah, I think I'm doing two events. I'm very excited. Last year there was a Mary Poppins dance along, which I hope they do again because I know all the words. So yeah, come along.
Wonderful. Oh, okay. Thank you, Sarah. So Sarah has the link over here. Katya says, thank you for a meaningful evening of poetry. And in turn, I want to thank you both so much. And this is a huge delight and a huge honor for us to have you with us tonight. And hopefully, we're looking forward to more events featuring you soon. As Juliet said, last year, Ella was our keynote for the Ecopoetics conference that we held at Kew Gardens. We're having another Ecopoetics conference again this July, and this time, Juliet is our keynote. So there will be poetry, there will be lots and lots of plants and botanicals and beauty. And we'd love to see you all there, whether you could make it online or in person, or if you continuously visit us on Indelible Evenings and Site Creative. For those of you who are new, Indelible Evenings and Site Creative are monthly. Indelible Evenings features poets and poetry readings, sometimes poetry book launch events. Site Creative is for both psychologists or anyone else who has a knack for both psychology and creativity. So psychologists that speak about a creativity theme, and then creatives who would like to showcase their own figments of the creative psyche. And I think we did a little bit of both tonight, a little bit of site creative, a little bit of going deeper into the psyche and what it means to be part of this world, what it means for this world to be part of this interconnected web of a universe that we are in. And thank you so much. We are ever so grateful for having you with us tonight. And this has been hugely, hugely wonderful and, just refreshing. This is what we need to end the day with, or start the day for those of you who are joining us from the States. So thank you, Ella and Juliet, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you, and bye-bye.